Good afternoon. My name is Michael Wong. I'm one of the two co-chairs, along with Michael Kramer, of the Veterans for Peace China Working Group. And today, I have some guests who are speaking on the subject of this book, which has just recently come out, China Changes Everything. I'm going to start with our first guest, Sara Flounders. Sara is a lifelong activist. She's been a committed anti-imperialist activist and author for a socialist future for the last 50 years. She's the contributing editor of Workers' World newspaper, a leader of the International Action Center, the United National Antiwar Coalition, and the Sanctions Kill Campaign. Sara, welcome. My first question would be, you were the one that initiated this book. What prompted you to initiate the book, and how did that process go forward, and can you talk a little bit about the book?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, and thank you to the Veterans for Peace China Working Group, who's been following this for so long and has produced a great deal of valuable material. What we were trying to do in this book, which has quite a number of authors who are social justice activists, journalists, commentators, is look at how it's possible for China to go from being the poorest country in the world, a formerly colonized country, destroyed by imperialist wars, and looted for over almost 200 years, into the century's greatest success story. How did it rise from poverty to become a leading force in global change, not only in China, but on a world scale? And whether we're looking at China's solar panels, wind turbines, hydropower plants, which can save the planet, or electric cars, or high-speed rail, or clean, quiet metro subways, these are examples for the whole world. Their Belt and Road Initiative is expanding China's infrastructure, really to friends of the global South, and it's building ports and highways and schools and hospitals, power grids, instead of creating a kind of a neo-colonial dependency. So all different authors in this book are looking at different aspects and different places in China where modernization is taking place, or countries around the world that in their relations with China have been able to literally catapult past a colonial underdevelopment. Now, should I go on, or you have another question? I'll talk about how we're distributing it, but no, I'll wait. You're muted. You're muted.
Michael, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, actually, you've visited China numerous times, and you've connected with a lot of different people there. And your research, as well as your visits with China, are interesting things that are the kind of the background of the book, the source of your writing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I've actually only had an opportunity to visit China twice. I do hope to go back again. But I was connecting with quite a number of people who maybe have been many more years in China, speak Chinese and are Chinese, who also are contributors in this book. The idea is to have an anthology, and each of them looking at different aspects. But what impressed me, it's really like stepping onto a different planet. So impressed me in China is the modern that stretches to every part of society, and just not seeing the homeless, houseless people that are in such huge numbers here, the people with desperate social needs. You don't see that in China. So it's not only in many ways more modern than anything here. If you're looking at the subways and the grocery stores and the exchanges, more modern, literally. And if you're looking even at parts of the countryside where there's huge tree planting going on, road building, railroads connecting, these were the things that impressed me just in an incredible way, and made me anxious to go back again. But trying to then gather in an anthology other, um, uh, you know, folks who are following China, as I say, and have been there even more often.
Thank you, Sara. Let me introduce our next speaker, Michael Kramer. He's a member of Veterans for Peace, Northern New Jersey. He's also the president of that chapter, and he's the co-coordinator of the National Veterans for Peace China Working Group. He and I have worked on developing this group together. He's also traveled in China. He's long been inspired by the Chinese Revolution and the heroism of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. Michael, would you go ahead and talk about your experiences and your chapter in the book?
Sure. Let me say that my contribution to the book is modest. It's a chronology of U.S. military involvement with China, inside China, beginning in 1820. And it came out of a workshop that was done for our 2020 National Veterans for Peace Convention. In the midst of the COVID pandemic, it was the first online Zoom convention. And so the workshop was done and illustrated with some really amazing photos that unfortunately couldn't be part of the book. As background, I was a history major in college, something that unfortunately I hope is not extinct in the choices that undergraduates make. But I've always thought that, looking back helps us look forward. They say you don't know where you are or where you're going to unless you know where you came from. And I was inspired to do some original research to put this chronology together. I mean, it's not new information, but I think it's the first time things were set down in a chronological format. And I'm happy that it's part of this book. I'd also like to say that Sara is an associate member of Veterans for Peace, and we have one other member of Veterans for Peace who contributed to the book, Brother KJ No, who I believe is in our San Francisco chapter 069. So we have made some contributions there. I would say too, as a young person growing up too much on the World War II movies that were part of our growing up, there was one movie that always kind of stuck out among others. The movie was called Gung Ho. I don't know if anyone saw it. The term gung ho, and really it's a story of a Marine Corps officer, Evans Carlson. We don't hear too much about him, and I think there's a lot of intentional reasons that various media don't project him. But Evans Carlson went to China in the late 1930s, went to Yan'an, spent time with the Liberation Army, the PLA, actually went out for about 1 year into the field with them, crossed Japanese lines, because at the time, parts of China were occupied by Japan. Anyway, he has been an inspiration somewhat for me to put this chronology together. And I think the best way to describe the chronology is maybe just to read 3 or 4 entries. The U.S. involvement in China lasted over 120 years. And many of those years, virtually all the years, it was a Jim Crow Army, Jim Crow Marine Corps, and a Jim Crow Navy that deployed to China. And the interactions that the military had with the Chinese people were, you can only imagine the racism involved. So I'll just start off by reading maybe 3, 4 or so of these entries to give you a little picture of U.S. involvement with China that we don't too often hear about. Okay, May 16th, 1820. The USS Congress, a 3-masted wooden-hulled heavy frigate with 38 guns and a crew of 340, docks unannounced and uninvited in Guangzhou on the Pearl River. So that was the first visit, uninvited, and that continued on. August 4th to 5th, 1855. I'm, of course, skipping some entries. The USS Powhatan, along with British allies, see 17 Chinese ships and destroy another in the Battle of Taiho Bay off the coast of Hong Kong. The U.S. demonizes the Chinese as pirates. Hundreds of Chinese are killed and over 1,000 are taken prisoner. December 4th, 1894. Marines from the USS Baltimore deployed to Tianjin. They remained there until May 1895. May 24th, 1900. The first U.S. ground forces landed Taku on the Haihei River in northeastern China and joined with 8 other countries to put down the anti-foreign occupation uprising known as the Boxer Rebellion. The so-called China Relief Expedition grows to over 19,000 soldiers before it occupies the imperial city in Beijing on August 15th, 1900.
So boring, Michael.
The U.S. Army 9th Infantry Regiment remains to guard the U.S. legation. And I'll just give one more, 2 more. We'll move to the 1920s. And so now we're over 100 years of involvement. February 24th, 1927. The 4th Marine Regiment, commanded by Brigadier General Smedley Butler, arrives from San Diego aboard the USS Chaumont. The ship docks at the Standard Oil Company terminal in Shanghai. U.S. military and forces in China now total 6,000 troops and 44 naval vessels in Chinese waters. Smedley Butler later writes, quote, "In China in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested." And we'll just give one more, take it up to the 1940s, just after the end of World War II. September 30th, 1945, Operation Belaguer begins with the 1st Marine Division arriving in China and deploying to Shanghai and Beijing. It is followed by an additional 50,000 Marines from the 111th Amphibious Corps, warships from the 7th Fleet, the 14th Air Force, and 2 Navy CB construction battalions. The stated mission is to facilitate the surrender and repatriation of 600,000 Japanese soldiers after World War II. Within a week, the 14th Air Force begins airlifting 50,000 Kuomintang troops around China for 3 weeks as they fight a losing battle against the People's Liberation Army. So those are some of those kind of when we went from the 1820s to the 1940s and captured some what you might call hidden history. There's so much hidden history in U.S. history, particularly of the wars fought. And if we take it just up to this past year, there were the hidden bases in Syria and Iraq that were recently evacuated. So I hope my chronology makes a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I should mention also that Michael is a combat veteran of the Israeli Defense Forces, so he knows what war is like, and he knows what war in foreign countries is like. Our next speaker is Arnold August. He's a Montreal-based author and journalist, and he has a master's degree in political science from McGill University. He's been published in the Global Times, Black Agenda Report, Global Research, teleSUR, Friends of Socialist China, Venezuela Analysis, CGTN, which is a Chinese mainstream media, and is a frequent guest on Press TV and teleSUR TV. And I see that you've written a chapter on Tibet, which I have visited on one occasion. Could you tell us about your chapter and about your experiences in Tibet?
Of course. First, I'd like to, I wasn't expected to speak, so my apologies for the impromptu set here, webinar set. Normally it's better than that. Firstly, I have to thank Sara for inviting me to write that chapter on Tibet. More often than not, Canadian voices are overlooked by the United States and the United Kingdom. I don't want to make any chauvinist remarks against Anglo-American colonial outlook, but it happens often. So I'm very grateful for Sara to having invited me to write that chapter. My history with China goes back to 1967, when I took a couple of years off my university master's Bachelor of Arts degree in political science, when I read in 1967 Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow. In fact, this is the original book that I brought with me from my travels. It has a special place in my mind and my action. That's where I was first attracted to China, 67. When I went back to university, I followed up my studies in political science for my master's degree and a couple of years of my PhD before I was expelled from university for opposing U.S. military activity in Vietnam. And so during my studies there, I studied very carefully the history of the Chinese Revolution. And I was fortunate to have a professor who was a specialist in Western and Chinese political thought, how China was able to and is able to put together the thinking of the Chinese Communist Party of China, as well as other trends of traditional thought, such as Confucianism. And then after that, I went to China twice. The first time was in 2006 with my wife. It was a 1-month trip to familiarize ourselves with China. We visited most of China, but we did not visit the western part. Thus, when I had the opportunity to visit Tibet in 2023, the fall of 2023, of course, I accepted it and I went to Tibet. And my chapter is based on my visit to Tibet at that time, as well as the follow-up studies that I did with regard to Tibet. It deals with quite a few issues. I will send you if people don't mind, I'll put a link to an article in Friends of Socialist China, which provides an introduction as well as the full chapter that I have contributed to that book. In that chapter, I think I did a pretty good job in dismantling all of the U.S. or the Western disinformation regarding Tibet. That it's the China is committing genocide against Tibet, the issue of boarding schools, the so-called persecution against people of Buddhist faith, etc. I think I did a pretty good job. And I think the comments that I got from people, the most positive was the portion where I contrast, on the one hand, the flourishing of Tibetan language, culture, religion, etc., led by the central government and the Communist Party of China, on the one hand, and on the other hand, where I contrast this situation with the deplorable situation of the native peoples in Canada and the United States. We often say that when the United States, China is accused of carrying out genocide against the people of Tibet, what they are really doing in the West, especially the United States and Canada, is to project what they themselves have carried out against the native peoples in their own countries, and projecting that and accusing China of doing that. But of course, what we found there were the completely opposite was the case. It is not flourishing, and the central government, in collaboration with the local Tibetan authority, do everything to make sure that this flourishes. So these are, I deal with that, the so-called boarding schools, the so-called persecution, genocide activities in the boarding school. I also came across a very interesting institute in Tibet that deals with the possibility of young Tibetans to develop their own initiative, their own entrepreneurship. And based on that, I discovered how one of these groups of young people there, Tibetans, discovered how to use drones in high altitude places in order to help their fellow Tibetan producers, farmers in high elevation areas to provide seeds and other activities which are helpful for agriculture, as well as a general GPS development, so people there know their own area better. So I deal with that as well. In fact, that whole issue of how that example, which I use to develop socialism with Chinese characteristics, of all places in Tibet, which only very recently, in terms of history, came out of a feudal, semi-feudal slave society, literally slave society, to develop socialism with Chinese characteristics. I'm happy to say that in July of this year in Paris, in a couple of months' time, I will be doing a presentation of my book, but only on one aspect, the theoretical aspect of how that long attempt on the part of revolutionary socialists of the world to solve the problem of, on the one hand, the state, and on the other hand, the individual initiative. And the example I give is from Tibet, but in Paris, I will be developing only that ideological, theoretical theme of state and individual with that example from China. And I'm also, with regards to this book, I'm in contact with, there's only one other Canadian who has written a chapter for this book, and that is Dr. Radhika Desai. So I'm in contact with her. We have a possibility, a proposal, which we'll discuss with Sara and other comrades, of having the Canadian book launch in Canada in September, of coming September, probably in Winnipeg, which is a very great place to have a book launch for Canada, because it gets away from the preconceived notions that everything that happens in Canada has to be from central Canada, from Ontario, Quebec. So we plan is to have that in Winnipeg, followed up by other book launchings in Montreal, as well as in Ottawa, in collaboration with the Chinese embassy in Ottawa, who are very, very interested in the book. In fact, they reached out when they found out that the book is being translated in China. They offered their assistance to help Sara and other comrades to make sure that that book is in fact translated not only in Chinese, but in other languages such as French, which is very helpful for us here in Canada. So that's basically some of the things I've been working on. I'm really happy to collaborate with you guys, and I really respect the work that is being done to actually produce this book in a quite a short period of time. I worked very closely with the editor on that, and it's quite an accomplishment to have this book published. And I just hope I can contribute more to the development of the book and the make sure that it's being circulated and well known in different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, anybody who's visited. Oh, go ahead, Sara.
It's just to follow up, and thank you, Arnold. It's so important you jumped in. I wanted to say a little bit about how the book is available, and as Arnold was just saying, does that fit here? Or?
Yes, please go ahead.
Well, we're excited to report this anthology is now available both in print and as an EPUB on Amazon, on Apple Books, on Barnes & Noble, on Bookshop, or at ingramspark.com. You can get it at a 60% off on the book, which is a huge discount. At our website, IA Center for International Action Center, iacenter.org. You can see the videos, you can download each of the chapters online, or you can get the EPUB. And we are pretty excited that we've signed the contract both for this translation into Chinese, but also into Arabic, Russian, French, and Spanish.
Great.
So it will be available in several languages. And just the ability to have this discussion with a growing number of people and to make it available really inexpensively, both the 60% discount, the online, the videos. We're going to make also an audio book, like a podcast that's coming up very soon too. Each chapter is an attempt to show how it's possible for China to do this. And I think really, as Arnold explained, and as Michael Kramer explained, the looting that went on under US in China. And now when they were able to break that, there's a fundamental class and property difference in the way they do things in China and who owns the resources. Here it's all privately owned, and that changes. And in China, the very fact that oil and gas and coal and gold and rare earth minerals and water and land are socially owned, along with the railroads and the airlines and energy and communication, they're owned by the whole people. The banks, this means that they're able to plan, and it's just impossible to really plan under capitalism. It's always what's the highest rate of immediate profit for a small number of people. So each chapter sort of raises this question in a different way. And I think that has a lot to do with the interest in the book and why it's getting around, because someone can be discussing aqua fishing or solar energy, and they're bringing in that same focus again and again, the difference in ownership of the vast resources that allows China to really solve certain problems that bedevil us here and are dragging us down. So thanks. Just wanted to put that.
Yes, that's very important. Those are very important points. Anybody who's visited China sees right away, even if you're just going for a short visit, you could sign up for a 2-week tour with any travel agency and go to China. There's nothing mysterious about it. What you see there is so different. It's in such sharp contrast with what the American mainstream media and the West's mainstream media keeps saying about China, that you immediately see that this is, not reality. When I went to Tibet, for example, the Tibetan school, their temples are still running.
When were you there? When were you there? Excuse me.
I was there back in 2016, I believe it was, and I saw the monks practicing in the temples. I heard the people speaking Tibetan. Because I'm familiar with how Mandarin and Cantonese and Chinese dialect sound, I understand the sound of it. I only speak a few words, but I can tell that they were speaking Tibetan, not Chinese. The signs were in both Chinese and in Tibetan. And when you look at China's money, for example, their bills have 5 languages on it: Chinese, and then 4 different minority languages, including the Uyghur language and the Tibetan language. I saw people dressed in modern clothes. I saw people dressed in traditional clothes. I remember seeing a little old man walking down the street wearing traditional clothes, looking like he had just stepped out of like the 16th century, except that he was speaking on a smartphone. And what people don't understand about Tibet was that under the old system of the monks and the temples being essentially the royalty of the country, it was an ancient system in which most of the people were serfs, just like in Europe in ancient times. And basically they just worked the land, and they were essentially work slaves for the royalty, which were the monks. And China changed all that. They brought modernization into the country so that everybody now is educated. All the young people can read and write there. They speak their native language, but they also are required to take at least one course every semester in school when they're growing up in Mandarin, so that they are bilingual when they graduate from high school. They can function in Tibet in their own language. They can also function anywhere in China in Mandarin because they are Chinese citizens. So they have the best of both worlds. It's just so different when you visit China and compare what you actually physically see to what you read about in the mainstream media. So once again, I just want to show the cover of this book. Does any of your presenters have any last comments before we close this presentation?
Just something short on the national minorities of China. The People's Liberation Army has, I think, a number of YouTube channels, and they're not only videos on weapons, they can be of human interest. I remember seeing one, and as veterans, we kind of know the deal. It doesn't matter what military you were in. Young people do act certain ways within that military environment. And there was a NCO retiring after like 10 years or 15 years in the PLA. And he was saying goodbye to the dog he worked with for at least 10 years. So if you want to see a tearjerker, see this guy saying goodbye the last time to the canine type of dog he worked with. But another one I saw on this channel was really interesting. It was filmed on a PLA Navy ship, an aircraft carrier. And it was all about the crew members of the ship, large ship, probably at least 1,500, 2,000 crew members. One of the newer ships in the Chinese Navy. And it was about the crew members who were from the Uyghur minority on the ship. Some were enlisted, some were officers. And you got a sense they were like fully integrated into the whole life of the ship, and the interactions you saw with the crew, 21-year-olds, 19-year-olds interacting with each other and just hanging out together. So I don't know, I have my filters on. I could tell when someone's trying to AI me or something like that, but it was very real. And in that way, it gave me appreciation of how China has focused on the national question by those young people who want to can join the People's Liberation Army from the various minorities that are not only in Western China, but in Northern China, or on the Korean border, or in Southern China near the Vietnamese border. So, yeah.
Okay, yes. And I said the bills have the different minority languages. I said Uyghur, I meant Uyghur. Okay, Sarah and Arnold, any last comments before we close?
Yeah, just one thing. I just dropped my chapter in the chat box so people can access it. The idea is not to have it for free, but to read it and to use that as a sort of an inspiration amongst other chapters to promote the book. This book has to go out even more. I'd just like to add one thing based on what Michael said regarding his experience in Tibet. I found exactly the same thing. What is ironic is that, yes, there's language is forced upon the people in Tibet, but how? In the outlying areas, in the rural areas of Tibet, where you have Han and Tibetan, the Han people are forced, so to speak, forced to learn Tibetan. So, as you said, Michael, it is so the narrative coming out of the West and the reality is so glaring. It's really hard to find a word regarding this contradiction. I guess the best way is for people to get a hold of this book, spread the book, and let people know the reality of China based on people on experience from people who have been there and have studied it.
Well, I'll just add a word in that China's relations with the colonized people of the world, because China acutely remembers when it was U.S. gunboats. There was a whole unit of the U.S. Navy that could sail 1,000 miles inland on China's rivers. And they were the rulers, the conquerors, the enforcers, and those days are past. So it's that determination to not go backward to a colonial, impoverished, looted past, and to build institutions that are determined to defend China's sovereignty. It's very important in China, hard to understand here, the importance of the Chinese Communist Party that has 100 million members that are elected from the ranks in every workplace, in every neighborhood, in every school, in every department. It's a big thing, having this sort of mass unit that functions together. So there are a lot of things that are not understood here, but we want to try to explain both the past U.S. role and duplicity and looting and their role today, and how China made this leap that is having a big impact, as we can see in Iran today. Let's look at what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz and who is backing Iran and who is backing the U.S. So there are changes in technology that are happening, and there are changes in countries around the world refusing to be colonized anymore and are determined to move forward. So at any rate, a lot of that's what we're trying to capture in a discussion in this book. I think I really want to thank again the Veterans for Peace China Working Group, because just holding this down over several years, constantly publishing articles on China that are of interest. I think you probably have one of the biggest collections, Mike Wong, that has been made, and along with the YouTube channel. These are important resources. I think they help people understand developments in the world now. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you. I think that's good. Let's leave it there. Thank you, all three of you, for presenting today.